Good morning, everyone. So this talk comes in response to people asking for advice on how to organize their teams as they sort of shift toward a product-centric model. You know, what skills, what knowledge, what roles should be pulled in to collectively form a product value stream group. And as we've been working with large enterprises during these transitions, it's become evident that there are new emerging roles that have been key to this successful shift. And so that's what we are going to be talking about today. And so, as Laurel said, I'm Dominica DeGrandis. I'm Principal Flow Advisor at Tasktop. And with that, one of the big things that I do is I help organizations design experiments to help them make changes. And those usually include making some form of work visible, making the issues visible, using some kind of visual indicators to enable this transformation, and because then people can see what the issues are and we can start to have these necessary conversations. And because we're doing experimentation, this involves looking at data and metrics so we can see if we're improving or not. And these are the topics that we're going to be covering today. So we're going to briefly look at managing work by product versus project, experimenting. Going to give you some examples, some ideas for experiments that you can conduct. And let's talk about how to reinvent and elevate our knowledge as we move into this new decade. And then I want to leave you with a few goodies. And one of them is going to be the skills matrix heat map so that you can help your teams level up. And with that, I'm just going to turn my camera off because you don't need to watch me speaking, and then I'll come say hi toward the end when we have some Q&A. There we go. Okay, so when it comes to experimentation, it's often around these three things, these three problem issue points. One, and because these are what customers complain about that often lead to experimentation. And so number one is that things take too long. Oops, there we go. One of the biggest complaints we get is that, and it's universal, is that everything takes too long. It's the 21st century, everything's moving faster and faster and faster, and so time matters a lot. The next one up is the progress of work is invisible. So people are asking, you know, where's my request? Where's my thing? It went into this black box and I can't find it. And so with this, we might see experiments showing, you know, saying, you know, what if we created this dashboard where requesters of information could get a high level view of where their requests are, what state they're in, and how long they've been in that state. And third example of an experiment might be, how do we improve the problem of delays due to dependencies, where this key information is lost during handoffs? And so with that, we might see how do we maybe loop in people who are upstream from us that we need something from them. How do we sort of loop them into our team, our workflow, so they're not part of a different team that has different priorities, so that we can get our handoffs done so we don't have as big of an impact with our handoffs. You know, we ask people for stuff and people ask us for stuff, and we had tell them, well, we'll get that to you by Thursday, and all of a sudden it's Thursday and now you're, you know, in a workshop or a webinar or something, and now you probably won't get it to them by Friday. And so this is the problem, isn't it? The problem, you know, for a spouse who can build or fix just about anything, is that the other spouse provides them with a very long list of things to do. And it's hard for them to say no because they like the person who asked. They like the person who asked. And the same is true at the office. The same is also true at the office. And so I often like to do this poll to ask people, why do you take on more work than you have capacity to do? And so here we go, we've got a poll. Conflicting priorities, misjudged effort, things always seem to take longer than we think, I'm a team player, don't want to let the team down, the boss, like we don't have a choice, sort of. And then other, please put, if you have another, please put it in the question box. This was a request from me because when I do surveys and it's A, B, C, D, or E, but my answer isn't in the survey, I get frustrated. So I at least want to have a free form. So you could click other here and then, but just put your questions in the GoToWebinar question box so that Laura will be able to read those out. And okay, just like 2 more seconds with our poll. 1, 2, let's see what we got, Laurel. Oh, it's a nice, look at that, it's pretty even. Conflicting priorities, that's, oh, we got a tie, conflicting priorities and team player. Yeah, that's right along with what I think. What do we, Laura, can you read some of the ones out in the, that people put in the other?
So we actually haven't got any that, those that put down other, they didn't submit anything in the questions box. So
okay, well,
let us know.
Okay, if you have time, I'd love to hear what your other is. All right, so conflicting priorities as being one of the top ones, I'm not surprised because a decision to do one thing, team A's priority isn't team B's priority. And so if we're on team B, we're doing, what our team, we're working away, we're doing what our highest priority is, which means if team A has a dependency on team B, then they're waiting on us and it's causing delays. Now we can have a lot of high priorities, but we can only have one top priority. And so being really clear on what that top priority is and making that visible to everyone can be quite helpful. If the question is, well, we're supposed to be working on A or B, and the answer comes back as yes or both, then that's when thief conflicting priorities is trolling you. Thief conflicting priorities is just one of the time thieves that we have. There's thief unplanned work. These are all the interruptions. This unplanned work is the foundation of interruptions that cause delays. Conflicting priorities is a thief of time, like we just discussed. Unknown dependencies on, this is like, did you hear that the database schema changed? Where's the wireframes? All the items that we are dependent on in order to get our work done. And then there's thief neglected work. This is usually important work, but it doesn't get the love or the budget or the attention necessary. This is often like fixing technical debt or making our own internal team improvements. And then of course the leader, like the leader of all the other time thieves, which is too much work in progress. All the other time thieves in one way or another are related to having too much work on our plate. Take thief conflicting priorities, for example. If we're unsure of what the top priority is, and we tend to say yes to too many things, we then will have too much work in progress because we're juggling a lot more things than we really have capacity to do. And so so I'm going to jump into project to product now. The project to product movement is clearly cooking. It's becoming one that many CIOs are seeing as necessary to partake to get their organization to the next level, 55%, according to this Gartner survey. But what does that really mean? What does project to product really mean? Well, there is this whole book on it, but I want to give you my 3-minute summary that's going to include parts of the book that I found most interesting. And the first off is this digital revolution disruption, and then I'll get into more what do we really mean by project to product. So Nick Kirsten authored this book, and it's showing the reality of the situation, particularly for retail, and how many companies are just struggling. We're seeing Macy's shops close. The big Macy's at our mall isn't closed. Same thing with Sears. There's just so much. I mean, Amazon has, and the other FANGs, the Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, have really disrupted the industry. And the data is showing that about 50% of S&P 500 probably won't be around in 10 years. And so just a lot of attention on this. Economists came out with this article on the tax rate on the banks. Like, even the banks are struggling, spending upwards of $1 trillion on digital, but still not reaping the rewards. And so the question is, has this happened before? And so in the book, Mick talks about the past technological revolutions, and really this comes from Dr. Carlotta Perez in her work, and defining what have been the revolutions in the past and what's happened. Well, now we're in the age of software and digital. And so what is this going to look like? Because for each of these turning points down the center here with the dashed line, there we call it the turning point. And go back, sorry. Lost my place. There we go. And so what it looks like is, in the beginning, we have lots of companies that are in the market. And in past revolutions, for example, in the age of like oil and mass production, there were over 300 car manufacturers in Detroit, all vying to make the automobile. But and so they were vying for financial capital. And then once they maximize that, they go through this turning point, and very few companies make it out of the turning point. And these are the companies that start to generate all the wealth. And this is what we saw with Ford, the few companies that managed to make it through the turning point. Ford was one, and we had, GE and Chrysler, and as we moved through that, and all the other automobile companies sort of, they didn't make it through that. And so what does this mean for technology? This is what we see with the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And we would want to add Microsoft to that also as major players that are disrupting the market. They have solved this problem. And so how do we help other companies solve the problem too? One of the things that's pointed out in the book is that a lot of companies are still using product or project management, which goes back to Taylorism as their model of working. And so a lot of people are revisiting, does that make sense? And it looks like that's why there's so much change. That's why there's this huge move, this migration from project to product, because of the benefits that we see. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So the product team's job is to create business value. And by value, I mean whatever it is that makes your company successful. Mark Schwartz wrote this whole book called The Art of Business Value, because we're always throwing the value word around, but not defining it. And when I ask companies how they define value, I'll get different answers. So that's often one of the first places to start, is how you define value. You know, it might be revenue, it might be profit, but it could be risk reduction. It could be the number of lives saved or improved security. Whatever matters to your business, that's what we're optimizing on, which is very different than optimization of scope, budget, and schedule of projects, which is what we typically see in a project-oriented world. So next up is that with products, work is brought to cross-functional teams that stay together for the long haul, right? They're not split up to go work on another short-lived project once a piece of functionality is delivered. And thirdly, but perhaps maybe most importantly, shifting your thinking from project to product allows you to shift your thinking on your cost centers. When you move from project to product, you move from cost center thinking to profit center thinking. This is where the teams, they can be invested in, right? The teams that build, deliver, and maintain the business value. They're not seen as a cost center, right? They're seen as a profit center, and therefore you can invest in them. And so there's two other, so I'm going to expand on probably two of my favorite reasons for this change. And that is, one, there's fewer dependencies from conflicting priorities. And because of the focus on the business outcomes, we can really we can bring visibility, we can expose at least 3 out of the 5 time thieves to help us visualize the bottlenecks, visualize the constraints in the system, and do something about it, particularly looking at flow metrics, and I'll be showing those to you in just a bit. So, managing by product reduces dependencies because we've got fewer dependencies from, whoops, sorry. I'll get the hang of this here. We've got fewer dependencies from less conflicting priorities. So when you bring the work to the people, we have these long-standing teams. Like here we've got product 1 team, product 2 team, product 3 team, and these teams stay together for the long haul. With projects, people are brought to the work. It's almost like they're treated like interchangeable, fungible resources. And if they have to support more than one project, they're being pulled in different directions, and we have conflicting priorities. When you hand a project off to a team that's going to sustain it, unless there's really good documentation, and I ask people, like, how often do you get really good documentation where you don't have to go back and interrupt the people who hold the knowledge? Usually no hands go up, maybe one. But if we've just handed off a big batch size of work, like a project, then the people taking over that work usually have to go interrupt the people who had been doing the work to ask questions, you know, like where's the configuration for this thing, or where's the information? We can't find it on the wiki. And so the people who had been engaged, who have the knowledge, then are getting interrupted for a while until the new team can come up to speed on it. So keeping teams together, you know, they can work long-lived, the knowledge stays with the group, they design, they build, they deliver, they maintain, they own it. And therefore, we see more success with long-standing teams. Managing work by product, we're also fixating measures on business outcomes, right? Not activities that essentially involve some kind of count. And so when we look at the metrics, we see metrics that are meaningful to business people under product, right? And what their needs are, right? They need it to be right. They need it to be on time. They need it not to burn out their teams. Right? We're focused on measures that are meaningful to our stakeholders and to the people who are our customers and our business teams, versus what I call the red, yellow, green report for project status reports. We actually call these watermelon reports because even though they're green on the outside, everybody knows that they're really red on the inside. I did a stint in a program management office for a while at a large telecom. We all had to do these status reports. And for one of my first ones, I marked red on schedule because all the indicators showed that, we're not going to make this with this existing scope. And so I put that in the report, and I promptly got pulled into the VP's office and sort of scolded in front of other leadership on why I allowed it to go red. And so did I mark my next project status report red? No, I didn't. I updated my resume because I wanted to work in an environment where it was okay to tell the truth, where leadership wasn't upset, if you will. You could go to leadership with the truth, and it was welcomed, where the truth was welcomed, where bad news was okay. So I tend to call these, the focus on the project status reports is sort of like making opinions visible, where on the product side, we're making value visible. There's a quote by Jim Barksdale, and it goes like this. It says, if we've got the data, then let's look at the data. But if we're just going with opinions, then let's go with mine. So we want to get to a place where we can accurately show the data, preferably data that is automatically coming out of our work tool systems and not having to be crafted and created by people entering information in spreadsheets and manually having to create a status report. This chart is a visual showing the shifts that organizations go through when they shift from waterfall to using a product team. So the pink arrows represent internal handoffs, like they might be generally in your same department or team. They're not external handoffs anymore. The white is an external handoff from a different department. And the green arrow that circles around the horizontal lane is showing the cross-functional collaboration, where everybody is sort of starting on something together and finishing work together. And then the yellow represents the team boundaries. And so this is one way that we can organize teams who have dependencies on each other to sort of optimize the end-to-end value stream. And it's why we're seeing, this is the evolution that many teams are taking to do that. And we're finding that design plays such a key role in this. If developers are blocked because they're waiting on wireframes, then maybe we ought to experiment and see if wireframe delays are reduced if we can bring a designer, if we can fold a designer into the loop. So by the way, I'm going to give you a copy of this deck at the end of the talk, so you'll be able to check this slide out more. When it comes to metrics, and the first item I brought up, that people complain that things take too long, you could use this chart to figure out where you're going to start and stop the clock. Because people will often, well, we can measure how long things take on our own team, but what's outside of our team in these gray boxes here is completely outside of our control. And so it turns out that where to start the clock is fairly easy, but how do we organize teams that have dependencies on each other so we can optimize the end-to-end value stream? It's a much harder problem. I want to jump into a little bit about the nature of working in tech and how there's this need to constantly reinvent ourselves as jobs change. I just bring up this World Economic Forum chart and the Future of Jobs survey that they did, that's indicating the amount of change, the level of change. And so when I was, my job has come and gone over the years. I used to be a build engineer, and I spent a lot of time doing configuration management and automation and source code control and merging and branch strategies, very time consuming. And over time, as we automated our builds and automated our deployments, and we started working out of main or out of the trunk and had fewer branches, my role and the work that my teams did started to go away. And if I think about it now, the writing was probably on the wall back in 2006, 2007, while we were going through our automation transformation. And so I'm just wondering, if you're a PM or you have project managers or program managers that report to you, do you think the writing is on the wall for PMO right now? Because roles come and go. And I think anybody who's been in the business in technology for 10, 20 years has had to reinvent themselves at some point in time. If we just look at the rise of the full stack engineer, we see, this is from Stack Overflow survey, and we see full stack engineers increasing, almost doubling in the last 6 years, going on 7 years, especially in the DevOps world, where the notion is you build it, that means you run it, right? That means you need full stack engineers. But I want to call your attention to this white paper that I was really lucky to take part in with IT Revolution and a group of other really brilliant people, that talks about how full stack, we need to be careful, because if we're expecting one person to be responsible for a lot of work, then we're sort of setting them up for burnout. Where it's kind of setting, DevOps isn't really about eliminating the need for cross-team communication, right? Or making one person responsible. We're trying to enable the different teams, the different specialists to communicate and work better. And so I'll give you a link to this white paper at the end. But if you're a full stack engineer, you work with them, you might find this interesting. And so for PMO, what we're seeing is this transition. Some organizations are transitioning their PMO, their program management office, to a VMO, a value management office. Because, if we're transitioning from scope and schedule and budget to a focus on value. And if we're doing then it makes sense that PMO transition to help the business optimize at the program level. And that's a quote from Kristen Biddulph, who has a video on how her organization transitioned to a product-centric way of working. And that link is there on YouTube. A really great presentation. And so based on this change, we're seeing some roles emerging. We're seeing value stream architects in particular, and some lesser known roles that we call value stream product lead and product journey owner. And sort of what makes up, what kind of skills do they have? Who should be on this team as we transition? And one thing that we're seeing is this focus on designers that I mentioned earlier. This even happened at Tasktop. We thought we needed more developers because hands on the keyboard was deemed the most important. And we actually had a ratio of 1 to 40. So 1 designer to 40 developers. And when we dug into it and looked at the data, we recognized that the ratio of developers to designers was wrong, and that adding developers wouldn't produce any more features delivered at the rate that we thought. We didn't really know where our bottleneck is. And so that's why making the value stream visible is so key, and measuring how long things take and measuring those wait states so we can see where the bottlenecks really are. Companies like Atlassian and Dropbox have also been shifting their ratio of developers to designers. So like Atlassian went from 1 designer to 25 developers to 1 designer to 9 developers over a period of 5 years. It's because of how important UX is in today's consumer and business apps. Now, how likely are you to buy something from a website that it looks like it was designed in, 1995 or something, with the bright blue or purple text? I know I'll go look for something else. If the website isn't up to snuff, then I'm thinking maybe their product isn't either. So by tracking flow efficiency, we can learn where the wait states are. If developers are waiting on wireframes, which is where we discovered the problem was, then it puts us in the right direction. We start having the right conversations. And that is something that the value stream architect really works at doing. As Satya Nadella says, there's really not a more important role that an engineer can do than to work on the productivity of the system. I think of like the BMW plant in Germany. The plant is the most important product, not the cars. It's how the plant is built, how the assembly line, how the cars move through the different assembly lines through the plant in order to be delivered with high quality and to be, to run off of that assembly line every 72 seconds or whatever it is. So for architecture, we need somebody to own the architecture of the software value streams, right? So we can accelerate this flow. So the value stream architect, this is somebody who's an optimizer for sure, right? They understand the theory of constraints, they study bottlenecks, but they're also an influencer because of what they find where the bottlenecks are. They're going to be putting requests in the backlog that need to be done in order to optimize flow across the value stream. So they're going to need buy-in, they're going to need support across the organization to drive that kind of change. They're also a part consultant because they're going to be working with people, product managers and business owners to drive these decisions about workflow tooling. For example, if a team wants to purchase a new tool to help them optimize their workflow, but all the tools are owned by this other department, and in order to get approval to buy that tool, they have to go, get approval from somebody else's budget. Well, they may not see the value in that tool and they don't want to give up on their budget. And that leads to, I've seen a lot of problems in this area. And so one of the things that the value stream architect can do is help influence how teams can, get tools that they need, the best tools that they need to do their job. And the DevOps movement is saying that too, like let people use the tool of their choice to get their job done. Let's just, hopefully we can integrate them so they can talk to each other and not exacerbate dependencies, but help improve them. All right, and so next up is this product journey champion. And don't put too much into the title of this role. Like I think if you Google it, like ball caps will come up or something, sports ball caps. But what we're finding is unless the value stream architect is available for all the product value streams across the company, which is, that'd be a huge job. Usually we'll see, you can have them at either level. You can have a value stream architect at the product stream level, and you could have it at the higher level too. But the product journey champion, this is somebody who has a role, has a seat at the table at the highest level, sort of like somebody at the business level, who can help executives and managers across IT adopt this product-centric mindset so that they can optimize their investments that they're making in technology, for example, with maybe understanding the tools that are needed or the tools that you don't need anymore. This, as we're working with a lot of organizations, this role is sorely missing in some of these transformations. There's really no one at the high level who has ownership and experience of optimizing value streams that can work with different value stream teams and help them on their journey. Somebody who clearly understands systems thinking, that it doesn't matter how good or how fast the development team is working when the bottleneck or the constraint in the system is somewhere else, right? We want to optimize the whole system. And so they also act as a dedicated coach to other people too, to people who are looking to be value stream architects. This is your coach. This is sort of your expert champion on the ground internally to the customer, not necessarily a consultant, but somebody internal to your organization that can help the enterprise move forward. Then there's what we call a product value stream lead. And so this position works specifically just on the product value stream, and some of their skill sets here. I mean, definitely intimate knowledge of the product, works very close with customers. They set objectives, they measure success, they have budget to do staffing and hiring, and they have an emphasis on team happiness, which is what you see there with my illustration of the Net Promoter Score for measuring the team's happiness. I'm going to talk a bit about that Net Promoter Score in a bit. But you may be wondering, well, what about the product manager? Because everybody asks about that. And so here's a slide. This is from our VP of Engineering and Product. Nicole put this together to show the differences between the product value stream lead and the product manager. And I also put Melissa Perry's book up in the top right corner for you. She just published her book it's called Escaping the Build Trap, but she's one of the foremost experts on product management. So I encourage you to read that book, because we do see a lot of shifts of people moving from project manager to product manager, which is a very, it's like a good step heading in moving and evolving from project to product. And so some of the differences here, right? The product manager, intimate knowledge of the product and customer, but more focused on priorities and feature design. There's this distinction between how the product value stream operates versus what it builds and why. So people who are responsible for what the product value stream wants and builds versus optimizing the actual value stream process itself, which would be what the product value stream lead is involved with. Generally, they don't, generally not involved. This is all in general terms, and yours may be different. This is just what we're seeing, what I'm seeing out there with organizations where product value stream leads have significant people management duties, and they're very much interested in flow efficiency and flow distribution metrics, which I'll show you in just a minute. So moving on, because I want to leave you with this skills matrix heat map. Do you have the right team? So the purpose of this heat map is to surface orange. Orange is where the risks are. This is a skills matrix where people self-rate themselves. So P1, P2, P3, those are people on the team. And they rate themselves without seeing how the other people have rated themselves. And the rating is at the bottom there. So they rate themselves a 0 if they're a newbie, if they this is their first time looking at something. And then on the other end, if they're a master, they'd rate themselves with a 4. The skills and knowledge on the left-hand side, and you could replace this with what skills and knowledge you think are necessary for your transformation. These are just some of the skills and knowledge that we're finding to be quite useful to move to a product-centric way of working. And if once we get all the people's response back on the team, then the manager or the leader of the team can consolidate it and we can see where all the orange is. And so these are the areas that become important for us to start helping train people, maybe add a class in your dojo or your community of practice or center of excellence. You know, we spend a lot of time training developers in new tools and technical people in new tools. Let's train up project managers to learn the new skills for value stream architect and value stream product lead and product managers. Here you'd see like our second to the last row has 3 zeros in it, so that's a big gap. We'd need to help level up people to understand what the dependencies are upstream and downstream from them. And you can see that person 3 and person 6 have a lot of zeros. So this is an indicator that we can get them into some training. You might be asking, well, what about people who tend to rate themselves maybe higher than we think? And so that's why we have 3 there as being an instructor, because if people self-rate themselves as a 3, then the expectation is, rather bluntly put, that they are expected to teach that skill set. Like they will be an instructor for a class on that skill set. The other thing this skills matrix heat map does is it allows you to see if your company is growing and you need to split into different teams. If you have 2 or more people that are at a 3 or above, then they can be the leader of another team. It allows you to quickly spot the gaps and split into teams where there was only 1 before. All right, I'm going to leave you with 3 experiment ideas. And here they are. What about delays? What about debt work? Because that's such a big complaint. Like we don't ever get time to fix technical debt or fix our own internal team improvements. And then we're overwhelmed. We have too much work in progress. And so the first experiment could be, gee, if we fold in designers into the team, does that improve? Do we decrease delays? You really only need 3 things to do an experiment. You need to do your goal. What's the goal? We want to decrease delays. What are the activities that you're going to do? Okay, we want to bring a designer into our team just for 1 sprint or 2 sprints and see what that does. And then you need a way to measure it. And so with an experiment like this, the metric that would be useful is flow efficiency, because this is how you're going to expose your wait time. Because a lot of the time in your speed metrics is wait time. So we want to be able to measure, well, how long is that wait time? What is our ratio between our wait time and our work time? It's a percentage, and there's the calculation there. The second idea for an experiment is technical debt or the internal team improvements that we need to make, are those getting prioritized as needed? If we have a Kanban board and let's say the green items on here, that's technical debt. Are these actually getting prioritized and making it to done, making it to value delivered? Or are they just sitting like neglected work in the system and not getting done? If that's so, then we can measure flow distribution, which is the ratio of our different types of work in the system. And if we're tagging debt work, we can see, well, just how much debt work did we do? You know, we want to make these trade-offs clear. We want to be able to set a strategic direction. Okay, well, maybe we have a new feature that we're trying to get out before the end of the year, and so we do need to focus a lot of work on features. But when are we going to get to the debt work? When are we going to get to fixing high risks? And then the third one would be if you're overloaded, if you're just drowning in work because you have too much work in progress, then are we able to improve? Are we able to get things done faster if we have less work in progress? And so for this one, you might experiment. And these experiments, I think they should be quite small, like 4 to 6 weeks. You'll get it's easier to get buy-in if the experiment is shorter. And so first off, visualize the work in progress, insert the enabling constraint, which would be the WIP limit. Here the WIP limit is 8. It's 7 plus 1 green. What this does is it says, if you look at the legend, the green is revenue protection. So this would be like your tech debt or your maintenance, your internal team improvements, things like that. And so if we always allow one revenue protection item in our work in progress at any one time, does that help us? Are we able to not only get some tech debt done, but does it improve our speed? Are we able to deliver faster? And the metric for that is flow load, which is a measure to help you balance the demand versus the capacity on the team. It's just a measure of how much load do the teams have, how much WIP do they have, and let's look at the trends over time. Here's sort of a slide that somebody put together for me just to show the overall picture of flow metrics. And I'm just aware of a time, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'll just sort of finish up quickly with a note that what we measure impacts people, right? Tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. And so I wanted to introduce this concept of a metric called flow safety, which is a measure of trust. Usually we'll see a net promoter score. The question is, well, what's the question? Sorry, it doesn't start with well. It starts with, I would recommend a colleague to work at my company. Well, what if you swapped that question out to one for safety? For example, our leadership is open to hearing bad news. For example, if I mark something red, does my VP yell at me in front of other people, or are they open? Is it safe to tell leadership bad news? Or does some sort of failure, do people get blamed, or does it cause inquiry? Are we curious and interested in why this happened instead of trying to blame people? Or we trust each other on the team. And so this is where people would vote between 0 and 10. And if you've got numbers that are less than 7, then those are indicators that maybe you don't have the level of trust or safety on your team that you thought you might have had. So something for you to give a try. Maybe this is something you would do quarterly in your organization at the value stream level, not just measure the dev team or the test team or the design team, but measure cross-functional teams. So takeaways, people ask how to get started, what knowledge and skills they need to learn. So think about what we've stated here, how can you reinvent and elevate your knowledge? Maybe use a skills matrix heat map to identify in your organization what skills, what knowledge do you want teams to increase on, and then provide an opportunity for training. You have all these valuable people in your PMO with valuable knowledge. These are people who know about revenue management and vendor management and cost management, and they know that they have good relationships with business people. And so help them through this transition by providing them with the training that can help them make this transition. We all need to adapt to change and grow and learn. And if we can provide our teams with if we can provide them with opportunities for learning, help them make this journey, help them elevate and reinvent their knowledge. And it all comes down to looking at our teams as if they were a profit center, so that we can invest in them and that they'll be able to provide us with quite an advantage in the marketplace against those FANG companies. And with that, let's open it up to Q&A. I'll just say that if you want a copy of this deck, just send an email to dominica@sendyourslides.com. Make sure you put flow in the subject, though, and make sure you check your spam. Many times this ends up in people's spam filters. But I'll give you a link to the skills heat map matrix. I'll give you a link to that white paper on full stack teams, and also a link to the Flow 101 workshop. A lot of what I covered in today's brief talk, I go into depth in detail in exercises in the Flow 101 workshop, where teams create experiments, and then we bring leadership in to get buy-in and in funding and support for teams to do short experiments in order to move toward a more product-centric way of working. And there's also excerpts of my book too, if you want. And so with that, let's, what kind of questions? Do we have any questions, Laurel?
We do, thank you, Dominica. And just as a reminder to everyone as well, we will be sending out the recording and slide deck tomorrow, but let's do some questions. The first one is, who is the right person in an organization to become a value stream architect? And can you talk about the career path for them a bit more?
Who is the person to become a value stream architect? So various people may fall into this role. One way, one person to look at is, who is the person that seems to know who to go to when there's dependencies and handoffs between different teams. Like they have a sense of where that information lives. With all the different tools that the teams are using, you know, which teams are using what tools and what artifacts, and where that information lies within the system itself. So they have a good understanding of sort of the whole product value stream. It does need to be an influencer at a bit of a higher level, somebody who maybe has a little bit of political savviness and respect from leadership, so that they are able to get their changes, they are able to get buy-in for the changes that they put in the backlog. And so the path to that role might be somebody who's read, maybe somebody in the DevOps community who understands the value of lean thinking and systems thinking. That's I think where we're seeing it, is people who have a good, people who understand lean concepts and flow, and who are a little bit higher up in the organization, or I mean, not like they have to be a manager or anything, but just that they have the respect of many people on various teams.
Great, thank you, Dominica. The next question we have is, do you have any recommendations on where to start when there are multiple Agile release trains in internal organizations that continue to operate in silos and are foreign to value stream mapping?
Wow, what a great question. So here's what I've seen work, is to start with an experiment, and it is to go, what I find, the coalition of the willing. So if you try and get 25 leaders in the room and get them all to agree on something, I've never seen that happen. But there's usually one leader where there's some hope, and maybe they need to change because things are so bad. They're in crisis, and there needs to be a change. But what I've seen is usually there's one leader who has some background in flow or theory of constraints, and they know that things need to change, and they're willing to experiment for a short period of time. And it's going to that leader and using this humble approach and saying, you know, I know we haven't been serving you as well as you like. Maybe somebody on the customer side, on the business side. We want to do this experiment. We want to try this new way of working. And would you be willing to work with us? You're going to need buy-in from somebody. Normally, you'd need buy-in from somebody on the business side in order to get sponsorship to try an experiment where you can, at least temporarily, create a cross-functional team where you have everybody that you need in order to do that work, and the dependencies are minimized. And then with that experiment, things do flow faster, and we start to see, oh, hey, can we do that? Like, I want to try that. And so maybe the experiment gets extended for another couple of sprints. And then pretty soon it's like, I want to be on that team. And other leaders see the progress and they'll say, hey, I want some of that. You know, can you please do what they're doing? And it sort of, then it can spread and grow virally. If it's coined as an experiment, experiments by their very nature will have some kind of failure in it, but because it's an experiment, it's okay, right? It's not deemed a true failure. We're going to learn something from it, and the data will show us what we need to do next. And so that's how I've seen experiments be successful when we're trying to deal particularly with dependencies and release trains that are any team that has silos.
Thanks.